Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over another leaked legendary tier set in Outriders, and this is going to be the Monarch set for the Technomancer. Now before we get into the video, less than 5% of people that watch my videos are subscribed to my channel. So make sure to subscribe if you want to keep up with all of my uploads. And like with all of these leaked legendary items for Outriders, we're not going to be focusing on the specific numbers on these items. We're mainly going to be focused on the mods and the tier set bonus. All of the class specific tier sets in Outriders focus on two abilities, whether it be through the tier set bonus or the mods on the armor pieces. And the first ability that this set focuses on is Cold Snap. Drop a gadget to inflict freeze on all enemies within a large radius around you. And freeze is essentially just a stun that lasts for a decent amount of time. So this ability baseline is just a massive AoE stun, which has a massive amount of room for different augments from mods. And the second ability is Cryo Turret. Place an automated turret that deals damage and inflicts freeze onto enemies. The turret's health depletes slowly over time and when it takes damage. And we have this ability in the demo. It's essentially just a turret that shoots freezing damage at enemies. It doesn't do a ton of damage, but it does freeze things pretty quickly and it stays up for a decent amount of time. And something to know with freeze, and even with this Cryo Turret, is that you can freeze bosses. The first boss, Gauss, in the demo is able to be frozen by this, and every other enemy that we were able to find in the demo could also be frozen. And the tier set bonus for the Monarch set is increases weapon damage on frozen enemies by 80%. Also, crit damage is increased for all party members by 10% for 8 seconds after using the Cold Snap ability. So this essentially turns freeze into a massive burst damage window, because now you just do a massive amount of damage on frozen enemies, and that is also an enemy that is completely stunned, so it's much easier to do headshots, which in turn does a bunch more damage. And then if you use the Cold Snap ability, you're also going to get an additional 10% crit damage, which is also a nice bonus, and also means that with this tier set bonus, the only thing it really wants you to use or forces you to use is Cold Snap. You can use any other abilities past that. So the first piece is Crown of the Borealis Monarch, and the tier 3 for this is Twins for Cryo Turret. 2 turrets can be placed before triggering the cooldown. Now I have talked about not liking a lot of the mods in Outriders that allow you to do 2 of the abilities before it triggers its cooldown, because it doesn't turn the ability into a charge system, so it forces you to use both of the ability uses at one time before it starts refreshing. But this one's a little bit different, because this will allow you to place 2 turrets out at the same time, making it quite a bit stronger. Because normally if you say just use some random damage ability, you'd have to use one and then use the other before the cooldown starts refreshing, and you have to do that with this one as well. But this also gives you something additional. Placing out 2 turrets at the same time is pretty strong. This can add a massive amount of CC and also do some decent damage. And the other mod is Painful Chill for Cold Snap. Applies extra 29,000 damage to all enemies affected by the skill, so now it turns Cold Snap into a slight damage skill as well. And Cold Snap does seem to have a pretty big radius, so this will add a pretty decent amount of AoE damage. Next we have a Robe of the Borealis Monarch, and the tier 3 for this is Icicle Storm for Cold Snap. Killing enemies frozen by the skill makes them explode, dealing 22,000 damage in a 5-meter radius. So this adds another damage element to Cold Snap, and this one definitely has some potential to be a chain reaction of damage, because now your Cold Snap that freezes everything allows you to then kill an enemy to explode to deal a decent amount of AoE damage to everything in a decent area, and add on top of this that you're dealing 80% more damage to any frozen enemies, so you could potentially Cold Snap a bunch of enemies, kill one, that's going to blow up and deal this 22,000 damage, or whatever it will be in the full game, but also it'll be doing 80% more than that just because of the tier set bonus, and that's in a decent sized radius. So you could potentially just have this chain reaction of targets exploding, killing another enemy to blow up, that then kills more enemies to blow up, to very easily just clear out big packs of enemies. And the other mod is Frostbite for Cold Snap. While frozen by the skill, enemies have reduced armor by 34% for the duration of the status, so just making enemies frozen a little bit squishier. Next, we have a Gloves of the BOREALIS Monarch. The tier 3 for this is Captain Hunter. Increases your damage against elites by 20%. I've gone over this mod before because it seems they either put this on a big chunk of different armor pieces, or they're not supposed to be here because of how these pieces were obtained. But this is a decent mod. This one I think is better than the damage reduction from elites, but overall, I think there's probably going to be some better class specific tier 3 mods. Then we have Surprise for Cryo Turret. The turret explodes before being destroyed, doing 43,000 damage in a 6-meter radius. And this seems to be a decent bit of damage, turning Cryo Turret also into a decent AoE ability, because it's also a 6-meter radius, which is pretty big for Outriders. And also take into consideration if you combine this with the earlier skill where you can use Cryo Turret twice before a cooldown, you could place 2 of these down in a big group of enemies, and then they'll blow up after dying and deal a ton of AoE damage. Next up, we have a WAISTCLOTH of the BOREALIS Monarch, and the tier 3 for this is Cryo Down for the Cryo Turret. Decreases the skill's cooldown by 50%. It's a pretty strong mod, especially combining with some of the other mods, especially with the 2 uses mod, where you can place down 2. I'm not sure if there's going to be some internal cap with how many turrets you could have placed down. It doesn't say it anywhere, so I'm assuming there isn't. So you could possibly get Cryo Turret's cooldown down enough where you could place 2 Cryo Turrets down and then have the cooldown of Cryo Turret be up quick enough to then place another 2. Then for the other mod, we have Freezing Boost. Boost your damage against enemies afflicted by freeze by 20%. And this is essentially just a slightly weaker version of your tier set bonus. So with this mod and the tier set bonus, you would now be doing 100% additional damage to frozen enemies, which is pretty massive. Then finally, we have Boots of the BOREALIS Monarch, and the tier 3 for this is Sharp Eye. Killing enemies while aiming down sights grants you 94,000 firepower for 20 seconds, stacks up to 3 times. Now this is a pretty massive firepower bonus. Comparing these numbers to some of the numbers on items officially released by the developers, this seems like a pretty big chunk of firepower, and this lasts for 20 seconds and stacks up to 3 times. This should keep refreshing the time. So say if you're at 3 stacks, you kill another enemy, it'll refresh and that'll last another 20 seconds. And ADSing in the game, you'll pretty much be doing most of the time. Like personally, when I play, I don't think there's that much of a reason to not ADS unless you're using a weapon that has a longer scope on it. So this could definitely be a massive amount of firepower. And even if it's not used on this specific build, this mod will probably find its way into at least a couple of the builds in the game. And the other mod is Cold Purification for Cold Snap. Skill activation removes negative status effects from you and all your allies in range and receive negative status immunity for 5 seconds. Now this could be pretty massive depending on if getting later into the game, if enemies start applying status effects to you more, or if there's certain bosses or maybe one or a couple of the expeditions that have a heavy focus on enemies applying status effects to you, because this not only removes all those status effects, but makes you immune for 5 seconds. And you could probably get Cold Snap down to a pretty low cooldown where you'll be able to have this up a lot of the time. So it could be good, but it all depends on how much enemies are going to be using status effects on you once you get towards the late game. So that is the Monarch set for the Technomancer. Overall, I do think this is going to be an incredibly strong tier set. I think having a set focusing on freezing enemies, which is already a pretty good status effect because it's a decently long stun, and then having massive damage buffs against frozen enemies is very strong, especially considering from what we know you can freeze at least some of the bosses in the game and pretty much all the other enemies besides that. So having a build that can do AoE freezing while doing a ton of additional damage to the frozen enemies is going to be pretty strong as a solo build or as a co-op build. So subscribe if you want to see more Outriders or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about this tier set, and thanks for watching.